Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives.
Hi and welcome to this awesome episode. Today we are super excited to have with us a much loved television presenter and radio host. She currently co-hosts The Breakfast Show on the hits here in New Zealand. She is raw, real and authentic and doesn't know any other way to be. She wears her heart on her sleeve and really tries to find the fun in life. Today we're talking autoimmune disease, surrogacy, embarrassing moments and the highs and lows of social media, all in an honest and frank way. We are delighted and honoured to welcome Toni Street.
Toni, you obviously have so many stories to share, from being hot in the public eye as a television presenter and sports commentator, to raising a family with husband Matt France of 3 delightful children, to surrogacy and battling a rare autoimmune disease, which you describe as taking an extreme toll on your body. Let's start there. Can you share a little of that story and the impact it had on your life?
Yeah, so I don't know what happened, but somewhere between my mid and late 20s, I started getting some really, really unusual symptoms. And as someone that was trying to break into my journalism career, I didn't really pay a lot of attention, but out of nowhere, I suddenly started getting asthma and eczema. I'd never had a scare of that in my life. And it sort of escalated to the point where I was getting severe stomach pains, and it was starting to really impact my life. And I don't know how many times I went to the doctor, and they'd put it down to things like, oh, you've just got bad indigestion. No one knew what was wrong with me. I went to a million dermatologists for the eczema. At its worst, they'd call it scabies, which it wasn't. Oh. And at best, it was just, you've got really bad eczema. Now, I wasn't an eczema child at all. This was only something that had come on in my late 20s. And I took a whole lot of sort of drugs for it, and it reared its ugly head after I had my first child, Juliet, and I had an anaphylactic shock when she was about 4 or 5 days old, and ended up in hospital, and they gave me some steroids for it. They didn't really know what it was. I put it down to a reaction to ibuprofen. I'd had a sore neck and I took some anti-inflammatories, and then it kind of went away. And then when I had my second child, I went into full-on organ failure, and I had to go to hospital for a couple of weeks when she was 6 weeks old. It was all very dramatic, as you can imagine. You've got trying to breastfeed a baby and you're in hospital, and no one knew what was wrong with me. And essentially I got released from hospital with them still not knowing what was wrong. I couldn't eat. I had severe stomach pain, bowel pain, felt like I was dying, and no one knew what was going on. My last sort of ditch effort was, because I was still within the postpartum period, and I had a really good obstetrician who said, go and see my friend who he grew up in Iraq with. He's really good at holistic health. He's a gastroenterologist, but he looks at the full picture. And I went and saw him, burst into tears and said, I feel like I'm dying. I've got a 6-week-old baby. My mum's with me. I think she was crying as well. What is going on here? And he went back and he looked at all my blood results. He did a full physical examination. And by the end of the session, he said, I think you have an autoimmune disease. I think it is this. I think it is something called Churg-Strauss. I'm not the right person to diagnose it. You need to go and see the specialist. And within the space of a week, I was looking down the barrel of having chemotherapy. I was in organ failure, and they diagnosed me with this autoimmune disease, which essentially I had been showing symptoms of for about 6 years, but not known what I had. And it was childbirth that made it present at its worst.
Yeah. So How lucky were you to be meeting with that particular doctor who knew exactly to refer you to? I mean, that's quite extraordinary, isn't it? You are obviously manifesting debilitating symptoms. How lucky were you to actually at that time be put in contact with the right person?
Without a word of exaggeration, I owe my life to a man called Dr. Ali Jaffer. And he was like this lifesaver. It was like finally someone was actually seeing the symptoms for what they were. He just had a holistic approach, which I think is what you need with autoimmune diseases. And had I not seen him, I would have absolutely, I think, had a colostomy bag right now. I had streaking on the bowel, so I was very close to perforating my bowel. I'd already had to have my gallbladder out. I had to have nasal polyp surgery. So essentially, Churg-Strauss is an autoimmune disease where your immune system is completely overactive.
Mm-hmm.
So the white blood cells flood your organs to the point where they essentially explode.
Mm-hmm.
And if I hadn't had it picked up at that point, I would have definitely perforated my bowel. And often the next thing to go is the lungs or the heart. And there are a lot of people that aren't as lucky as me that don't pick it up when they're as young, and they get it in their early 40s, by which stage they've already had permanent damage to their heart, and it shortens your life.
Yeah.
So I feel so lucky that I was able to be under the care of this man.
Well, when you actually look at the symptoms of Churg-Strauss, because that's one of the things that come up, isn't it? It's asthma, sinusitis, I couldn't say that, sweat, joint pain, and by the sounds of it, you were, as you say, you got all of them in your 20s, and it's very, very unusual to get asthma in your 20s, isn't it? It's more and more a childhood thing, and then you grow out of it, not grow into it. So I truly think, like, as you say, you were with a doctor who was holistic. I think this is where, I mean, I love the medical profession. I think they're amazing. But I think there needs to be a holistic approach all round, doesn't there? You know, we need to be more open-minded. And when we do portray certain symptoms, you know, it's so easy just to say, oh, yeah, you've got, you know, a gastro something, or you're suffering from indigestion, or we put everything down to stress nowadays. But we've got to listen, haven't we, to our body? And we've got to really, and I think we've got to be more firm with doctors as well, and not be palmed off.
Yes, and it's very interesting, and we've actually experienced that a few times in my life. Like, anyone that knows my story, I have had 3 siblings die, and my twin brother died of leukemia when I was 18 months, and from that moment my mother learned how she had to push the medical professionals to get answers, because for a long time that they didn't pick up his leukemia either. And my mum trusted her gut and knew something was wrong with her child, but she had to rattle some cages to get it done. And even when I was first admitted as someone that had just had a baby, I obviously knew what pain was because I'd just been through childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
My symptoms and pain weren't taken seriously when I first got to hospital. And I feel like it was almost a calamity of errors, which, you know, every new person you saw, you had to start from the beginning and tell them what had happened. And unless you actually push, sometimes I think it can be overlooked, and there's not a lot of understanding of autoimmune conditions, because it can be put down to, oh, she's got eczema, oh, she's got asthma, but it's actually until someone looks at it in its entirety that you actually understand what it is. But these things are serious. They're not airy-fairy. You can lose your life from it. So I think there needs to be a greater understanding and of everything being put together. Even things like nutrition can affect it. And I don't blame the doctors, because they have an area of speciality, but I don't think there's a lot of collaboration, and that is what diagnosed me in the end.
Yeah, and that's a great word, collaboration, and it's the same in any profession, isn't it? As soon as we collaborate rather than trying to work against each other, things just flow so much better. And there does have to be that collaboration with doctor, that crossovers, because as you say, you know, it's exercise, it's nutrition, it's looking after yourself, mind, body, soul. It's all got to be a whole package, hasn't it?
Yeah, I really do think that, and I think there are so many different parts of health that you actually have to take it on yourself as your own responsibility to educate the people that you go and see, because you could leave out one little thing, and that happened to me a few times. I forgot to mention that I was getting esophagus pain, and they went, oh, so you were having a pain down in your left side as well? I said, yes, and that's how they then diagnosed that my gallbladder was completely diseased. Right. And you forget one little thing. If you're not advocating for yourself, no one else is going to. So I think it's really important to listen to your body, all the little things, and I've been terrible at that in the past. I grew up as a Shelby Wright person on a dairy farm to push through the pain, and I think that's partly the reason I've ended up with an autoimmune disease. I think I probably pushed my body too much, didn't listen to when it needed a break, and now I have a autoimmune disease that I can never be recovered from. I just have to keep it bay and in remission.
And Toni, that message is so strong, because I have 2 autoimmune diseases. I've got the celiac and I've got the B12, and I've just actually had 10 days in hospital here with coming out after 10 days without a diagnosis. And what was really interesting about being in a hospital is, although the nurses and doctors were amazing, the feedback from the patients was that you don't get heard and you have to push all the time. But How do you manage that? Obviously, you're very strong as a person. You've got lots of courage. What would you say to our listeners who feel they actually can't fight another battle? You go into hospital almost to be diagnosed. You don't want to have to fight. You don't want to have to sit on the internet and research what you might have yourself. Mm-hmm. How do you push through that? What would you do? How did you manage those dark times?
Well, I had a few occasions where, and it's very unlike me, I wouldn't say I'm an overly emotional person. I pushed through things, and I remember there were a couple of instances in hospital where I was just done. I was like at my lowest ebb, and I remember one of the nurses came in and tried to put in a line and just completely got it wrong, and it was a lot of pain, just tears streaming down my face. Mm-hmm. And after I'd seen, I think, the 6 different specialists, and they said, right, start from the beginning, and it was like I could almost not speak. I just had told my story to so many different people, and no one was giving me anything. So I really relied on at that time having people to advocate for me. Mm-hmm, yeah. And I remember that day my husband picked up the story and had to tell all of the symptoms to the specialist, and it's very unlike me to be lost for words, but it really was. It was like and I think too, I'd just been through childbirth, and you're in your body's in quite a state of flux anyway. Yeah. So I really relied on my mother and my husband to be health advocates for me. Yeah. And it's a really important lesson I've learned from my kids is that you need more than just one person to be across your health, because often it's the people looking in at you that can actually see it better than yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting to say, because they're obviously listening to your symptoms and they can remind you of things, can't you? Because as you say, when you go to the doctor, sometimes you portray or you tell them what your most recent symptoms were, because that's the forefront of your mind. But you might also be having a good day by the time you get to the doctors. So actually, when we're very, very good at minimising our symptoms, aren't we? Going, oh, we did have kind of this and this. We're so good at that. So actually, it's probably a good idea for listeners to suggest to them to write down anything before you go and have a list.
I was going to say the same thing. Write it down, because if people, I think, generally like to, because you get really sick of it and you get bogged down and you want to get on with your life, particularly if you've got children as well. And so I would often present as this very smiley, upbeat person at these appointments, when the reality was I was in despair at home. Yeah. And my husband and my mum would often say, that's not right. You haven't been feeling well today. Mm-hmm. But because you want to be positive and you want to, I am a believer in being positive and optimistic, you can sometimes glaze over the fact of how sick and unwell you are. So I think writing down all of the things that happen, and I never did that, but now I do. Yeah. To remind yourself, actually, I did suffer a bit of eczema last week, because your mind is very quick to get you to forget when it doesn't want to be sick.
Totally.
And also, I think you touch upon the 2 lives that we lead, because I was listening to a doctor talking on radio the other day, and he was saying he looks around the waiting room and there's very sophisticated, very well held together people in the waiting room. And then they come into the doctor's surgery, completely break down for 10, 15 minutes, and they're an absolute mess. And then they go out again and they're well composed, wipe the tears away and carry on. And he said it's just a reflection, really, that we're all trying to cope so much with life, aren't we? And that actually there's a lot inside we're trying to deal with as well. And we've got to be really honest. When we're in the hospital, when we're in the doctor's surgery, we're just got to be completely honest about what we're facing. And our message, Jo and I keep putting out there, is be honest, be real, be vulnerable to our listeners. Speak to your friends, talk to your family.
I think that is absolutely the case. And I had an example of that last year where because of my autoimmune disease, I am allergic to a lot more things than I ever was. And I was prescribed some erythromycin antibiotics. I was about to host the Commonwealth Games for TDNZ, and I had lost my voice. And on my charts it said I was allergic to penicillin, which to this day I still don't really know if I am, but it was during the time of not knowing whether I was had the right diagnosis or not. And I took this antibiotic, and with a couple of days I had completely yellow eyes and I was in liver failure. And I went in to see a specialist, and I just felt so unwell. I think from what had happened with my autoimmune disease when it was initially diagnosed, I was just in floods of tears with her. And I think it is good sometimes, because it shows how serious it is. Mm-hmm. Because the old me wouldn't have done that. The old me would have gone in and she would have had no idea how badly what the bad way I was in. And then it turned out I was in a really serious way, and it was touch and go whether I was going to have a liver transplant at the end of it all. So, I think it's important. You can't actually just hide it, because, it's literally your life. And I think you've got to be vulnerable, and they're actually okay with you being like that. It's quite normal to be.
Yeah. And Toni, you're clearly juggling a high profile life, children, family, work, sickness, all together. What message would you put out there to our listeners in terms of how do you balance that work, life, family, children, health?
I think the answer is it's a constant reassessment. And I think that is really important. Just because you lock yourself into one way of living, it doesn't mean you cannot change that. And I've had that in the past a lot. When I was hosting 7 Sharp and I was working in the mornings, I did it for a year and realised, you know what, this is actually not good for me. It's not good for the kids, or I'm not getting to see them at night, and that's really important to me. And I reassessed and I made the decision to change it. And I'm the happiest now that I've ever been because I did that. And I think sometimes we feel like we're locked on this treadmill and we can't actually make adjustments just because we've committed, but actually you can. And I think when you say to people, I actually can't do that because I've got 3 young children and I don't have the time, I'm always surprised at the answer. It's like, oh yes, of course you can't.
Yeah.
And whereas it's almost like I'm scared to hear their response. It's like, well, you're in charge of your own life. You can actually make those decisions. But when you're a yes person and you don't like to disappoint, and I'm definitely like that, I think you're scared initially, but the more you actually explain it, the more people understand. And really everyone is the same. They're all trying to juggle busy lives, and half the time they expect you to say no, and you've just got to remind yourself of that, I think.
Yeah, you don't overcommit, because it's a great one, because as women as well, and bubbly people like we are, we do say yes to a lot of stuff, and actually it just takes a little bit of practice, doesn't it, saying no, and then it becomes a bit easier over time, and you don't have that same guilt that you have initially when you say no.
I think that's absolutely the case, but I have to say it's always a work in progress, because some weeks I feel like I'm nailing it and I haven't overcommitted, and then it only takes, like the weekend just gone, I had 3 of my children all spewing at the same time, and I felt like I was getting back to the out of control state, because sometimes it's that delicate balance. So but at times like that, then I just try and reassess and go, do I really need to commit to that? Or am I better to just actually come home from work, and it's not vital that I go and do a gym workout. It's actually better that I just sit and have a cup of tea.
Absolutely. And I think also it's encouraging for all of us, isn't it, to hear that not everybody has perfect lives. We see, especially in the press, social media, and this is our message to teenagers. You look on social media, you see these perfect lives, but actually that's not the truth. You can never judge what goes on behind closed doors, and actually we want to hear the stories that somebody else who seemingly has that perfect life actually has got their daily struggles like we do as well.
Yeah, and I actually think we've been having this debate a little bit on radio recently, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but statistics have just come out around unhappiness in social media, and actually people aren't as unhappy as you might think. But I think it all comes down to the people you follow and choose to be inspired by, because there are actually a lot of people out there now who are being more and more real about their lives. They're showing the photos without makeup. They're saying, I couldn't cope with the kids today. And I think that's refreshing. And that is where social media can be great. It's when you're following all the picture perfect lives that it gets hard, because you think, well, why aren't I doing what they're doing? But I actually think that of myself. I really take the responsibility to try and be as real as I can on my social media, to illustrate that it's really not great all the time. But it's human nature, isn't it, to pick the best photos of ourselves and put them up.
Yeah, I must admit, since we've started this and we've been doing lives and posting pictures, like once upon a time you'd look at a picture and go, oh my God, I can't post that, it's hideous. And you go, actually, that's just what I look like, just post it. Sometimes I look freaking hideous. Yes. And slap a bit of makeup on and I can look half decent, but just post the bloody picture.
Yeah, and I think it, particularly women like our age, women perhaps over the age of 30 who have been there but done that, know what it's like to feel like you're comparing yourselves against people all the time. It's really important to post those sorts of photos, because it will encourage, I think, that younger group who are on social media more and more to realise that they can actually do it as well, and they don't have to be perfect and getting lip fillers every 5 seconds.
So Toni, how do you deal with the criticisms that come towards you in the press, in the media? Because that's a big thing, isn't it? You're in the media all the time. I mean, we've only just launched ourselves quite recently. We've only been doing this for about 4 or 5 months, and we're just starting to get feedback now. And obviously you want the good feedback. You don't always want the bad feedback. When the negative criticisms come, how do you deal with that?
Oh, I don't think this discussion has ever been more important than it is right now. We're right in the midst of seeing Meghan Markle and Prince Harry come out and speak against it and say it's not okay.
Yep.
They've taken the unusual royal step to talk about it when for years they haven't said anything. They've stayed with that stiff upper lip. To be honest, in the past, I have been someone that has dealt with it on my own, and I haven't really wanted to talk about it openly because I feel like it gives it oxygen, and I don't like to give the people that are the trolls that oxygen. There's such a difference, I think, between constructive criticism and feedback, and then the people who are just nasty. And those people are always going to be there. They have far more access to us than ever before. When I started my media career hosting breakfast TV, we would get emails and they were kind of filtered. Now people can direct message you on Instagram. They can direct message you on Facebook. We have a text machine that pops up on radio where people can say what they like whenever they like. The answer is it still stings. And I hate that it still stings because the rational side of me says, that person doesn't mean anything to me. They're nasty. They're a person that would never say that to my face. But we're also humans and we do get hurt by it. And I think the moment I stop getting hurt by those sort of comments, it kind of means I've gone numb to the whole thing. And I don't think that would be good either. Yeah. But the best advice I can give for anyone, and this is younger people as well, is to stay off those things that you will potentially get bad feedback, nasty feedback from. So when I host an episode of 7 Sharp, I don't go through and I don't read all the comments off the back of the story. I try my best not to delve into the Facebook comments because you know that there might be 20 and 19 of them will be good. There'll be the one nasty one, and I know the way it affects me. Some people are better at brushing it off. My co-host Sam Wallace on the radio is quite good at that. He's just won Celebrity Treasure Island and he got a full mix of it all. He's better at coping. I know I'm not. Yeah. So the only way to not be affected is to avoid it, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And people just should be careful in life with what words they use as well, don't they? You know, that just proves that, you know, we talk about this, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's so outdated because words hurt more, don't they? They really hurt deep.
Oh, I think they do. And the thing is, there's a big push to be careful what you say online. People will take offence and you don't want to be a bully. I agree with that, but I also think nasty people will always be in the world too. So as much as you want to sort of hide yourself from it, they will always exist. And so I think you've got to come up with a way to avoid them or to not be affected because they're always going to be there. And it's just a sad part of life. But I often think about how I get affected. And I've been in the media game for 15 years. So I can absolutely see why we've got an issue with teen suicide in this country. A young mind that doesn't have the perspective, it can be mortifying, and I understand that, and that it's really concerning, and it worries me when I've got young girls coming through, and my eldest is particularly sensitive, and I'm trying to do my best to try and make her resilient now, because I think, you know, those types of people can be a real easy target.
Resilience is key, isn't it? Because Joe and I, between us, we've got 8 children, 8 teenagers almost. She's got 4, I've got 4. And, you know, we listen to their stories, we listen to their friends. I've been teaching in schools for many years. And obviously what teenagers don't have is that resilience that we have as we get older, to brush it aside or to put those techniques around ourselves to protect ourselves and say, I'm actually just not going to go there, or be strong enough not to open the social media comments. But actually for our teenagers, it's so hard because it might not be social media. It's actually going into the school environment day after day after day, where there's cliques, there's groups, you fit, you don't fit, you belong, you don't. And actually juggling the comments that are made. And it's not even comments, is it sometimes? It's just a roll of the eyes on a bus, school bus, that can set you off. And I think nowadays it is so hard for teenagers, but for parents listening, to teach your children resilience is critical, it's key. Whether you teach it in sport, whether you teach it with whatever means you teach it, teach resilience to your children.
We were talking about this the other day, weren't we? You know, because like in some sports nowadays, all the children get a medal for just participating. We were going, no, that's not teaching your children resilience. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's not PC or PC. I don't care. We have got to teach our children it's okay to lose. It's what we've
I'm
got to do.
so glad you feel that way, because I've just had my first year of coaching netball. I coached my daughter's team, and I absolutely loved it. And you know what? They were a good team. They were a really good team. They didn't lose a game all season. I almost felt like there were some people that didn't like that, and that it was seen as a bit of a bad thing. And I think, no way. I grew up learning so much through sport, how to win, how to lose, how to deal with difficult people, and it's a lesson for life. And I was really strong on that. I think, you play to win. Yes, we all want to have a great time, and at that level, I get sometimes they have to ditch the rec teams and things to make participation strong. But when you get to the point where no one cares whether you've won or lost, I absolutely reject that, because I think that is the life. And if you're going to teach them that, then what's going to happen in their teens when actually suddenly they are passing and failing exams, and they have to learn that, sometimes you lose and you have to deal with that. And I think that happens. You need to teach them that. I think I'm doing that with my 14-month-old son. You pack a patty, you're not just going to get a biscuit.
Yeah.
That's not how it rolls.
Absolutely, totally.
And we can't teach our children that we live in this duality. We don't have one without the other. We don't have a win without a loss, do we? I was coaching rowing. I was director of rowing at the local school for a while, and I used to say whether the children won the race or lost the race, it didn't make any difference really, because if they'd won it, somebody else had lost, and vice versa. And how do you deal with a win without being totally an ego, and how do you deal with a loss without being in anger and rage? How do you deal with both in humility and integrity, and stay in the place of I'm training to win, but my losses are where the lessons are. That's actually where we learn the most, isn't it? When we're vulnerable, when we're losing, when we've actually lost, when we've been defeated, that's where we can learn the most. And whether it's later in life, a relationship breakup, a job loss, that's the same tools and keys that they will use to get through that, as opposed to the opt-out method, which is the high suicide teen rates.
Absolutely. And I think so much of it is when you play to win, it's the journey there as well. If you're not playing to win, the journey isn't as fun. And I think when my netball team looks back on how they did when they were year twos in the netball, they probably won't remember whether they won or lost, but they'll remember how it felt, and they'll remember the season and the journey. And I feel like you only get that if you're striving, you're not just playing for no reason. It's part of wanting to win that gives it that good feeling.
And there's that feeling, isn't it, when you watch a team as well? My older boys both play really good rugby, and this year the first 15 for Takapuna Grammar weren't that great, because that's just what happens in transition sports. 1 year they're great, 1 year that, but you know what, they played every game to the bitter end. They didn't give up, and that's where the resilience is. They stayed as a team, they didn't fight against each other, they supported each other, and even if one made a mistake, because that's what happens in teamwork, the others gave them a high five or a pat on the back. And do you know what, it's things like that actually make me cry on the sideline. I love that shit.
They do. It's like going, have you ever been to a school cross country and there's the person that absolutely hates running, but they still do it, and then the rest of the crowd is all cheering them on, and that's what it's about. And so when I heard earlier this year they were thinking of not making it compulsory, I was like, why don't you make just maths not compulsory as well, and science while you're at it, and reading, because if little Johnny's not good at reading, you may as well just not teach him.
Absolutely. I know, we agree,
and
totally.
don't we want our children to learn the really tough lessons while they're actually living at home, while they've got safety and security of the home environment and parents to support them in it, as opposed to overprotect them, keep them safe at home, and then send them out into the world where they don't have those tools and techniques, and they don't have the resilience. We want them to make mistakes. We want them in many ways to have it. We don't want them to have it tough, but we do. We want to protect them naturally as mothers, as parents, but actually the ideal aim is that they have those lessons, those tough mistakes coming their way while they're still at home, and we can actually support them and teach them those skills to get through it. And role model.
I totally agree with that, and we were actually discussing it on radio this morning, because my co-host Laura McGoldrick's daughter is going to daycare for the first time, and she had to leave her for the very first time. And she said to me after the show, they've just texted and said she's been crying. I think I'm going to go and pick her up. And I said, don't. I said, you've got to be a good parent, sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, and she will thank you eventually. And I think she knew that, but sometimes you need to hear it, because your first instinct is just to run to them, but it's not often what is best, is it? No. So It's hard to do because sometimes all you want to do is cuddle them and pick them up, but you got to think, cruel to be kind. I think there's something in that saying.
And that is so tough on the parent, isn't it? Because when it's your child yourself, it pulls on the heartstrings. And we're used to, when they're babies, we're used to just naturally picking them up, aren't we? And actually to separate ourselves from them and say, actually, when do I need to be there and when do I not? That's the learning that we need to go on as parents. And we're forever learning. I say to the teenagers and the parents that I work with, you teenagers have never been teenagers before. You parents have never parented teenagers before. We're both on this journey of exploring what's right, what's wrong, what works, what doesn't work. But I think the biggest lesson is just being open to growing all the time and adapting and changing, isn't it?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And you've got to accept that you're going to make mistakes as a parent as well. My son Lockie at the moment is being quite clingy, and I genuinely think it's my fault because I felt like I was really busy at work there for a wee bit. So every time I came back, I was picking him up. He had him on my hip. And now I've made a little bit of a rod for my own back, but I accept that. And now I've got to do the hard yards to get it back to the way it was, But I don't think there's any shame in that because none of us really know how to do it 100% perfect. You've just got to admit, okay, that was my fault. Now I've got to correct it.
Yeah, and the thing is, you think because this is your third child, and you think, oh, I've got this down pat, no problem. But actually, they're all blooming individual, and you have to treat them all very different, even though you kind of have the same rules, same boundaries in the house. But at the end of the day, they're very different personalities with different needs, different requirements. And we've got to be in tune with that as well, haven't we? So we never actually really have a bloody clue, do we? We just get through each day at a time.
No, it blows my mind how different they are. My eldest is super sensitive. I don't really need to discipline her at all. In fact, I've got to be really careful not to be too stern because she takes it all to heart. She doesn't put a foot wrong. My little middle child is the diva of the family, and I can tell her off, and I always can see her going, I don't care that you're telling me off.
I think we all have one of those, don't we? My father says that was you, Sue, and it's payback now. When you look at that child you've got, it's payback for what I had to go through.
Yep. And I think that's the test. And thank goodness they're not all the diva, because can you imagine?
No! Why would we ever want to imagine? That would be hell. Oh, we do love them, though. They're amazing.
They are.
They are.
Now, we've got a question we're dying to ask you, which I'm sure everybody asks you every time they speak to you, which involves pink dresses.
Go on.
And boob gates.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about it. We're dying to hear it firsthand.
Oh, goodness me. So, when we go on the telly, we have a stylist that chooses a dress for us, and usually we have a bit of a try on. And on this particular day, I tried on this beautiful pink dress, and I love pink. It looks great on camera. I loved the dress. It looked gorgeous. It fell beautifully. The problem is we didn't test what it would look like sitting down. And the moment I sat down, the pleats or the gathers in the dress just happened to gather right underneath the bosom, which made them look like essentially big droopy nipples.
In other words, described as udders, wasn't it? Udders?
The production team didn't realise when I was with them. So it wasn't until I got off 7 Sharp and I looked at my phone and I had all these people going, are they your actual nipples? What do they mean? And I didn't even have to look it up because someone had so lovingly sent me a screenshot. And I got home and I said to my husband, oh my gosh, did you see my dress tonight? He goes, no. He'd watched the entire show and not noticed. But it was absolutely the worst wardrobe malfunction I'd ever had, and it ended up making it all the way to the UK. It was in the Daily Mail, boob gate. I couldn't believe it. It's just so great to have people talking about your breasts.
You know what? I loved it. I didn't love it for all the comments that came out, but just to have a laugh, everybody's having a laugh, not at your expense, but just about women in general, about the faux pas we can make and about the things that we do and don't do, the fact we're not perfect, and just to kind of jolly everyone along and just kind of let your hair down and just be funny in the moment. I just loved it. Not at your expense at all, but and the way you handled it I thought was absolutely brilliant, because I think I read in the paper your first reaction was to be mortified and the second reaction was just to, you just need to go out there and put people straight, which is actually what we need to do. Do we get offended in life? And that's a big one, isn't it? When somebody says something, or we've done something wrong, or we've really put our foot in it or put our mouth in it. Is it foot or mouth? Foot in your mouth or whatever. Do you actually react in offence, or are you mortified, or do you just actually deal with it and say, well, actually, everybody else could have made the same mistake as me. It just happened to be me at the time.
Well, it's actually really funny you say that, because some of the comments were like, oh, that's so funny. But a large chunk of them were like, are you okay? I'm so sorry this happened to you. And I was a bit perplexed. I'm like, what do you mean? I had a bit of a dress malfunction. It's not the worst thing to happen in life. It's actually quite funny. And I genuinely see things like that happen and think, people have lost their ability to laugh. Like, I don't give two hoots if that goes out there. Like, honestly, it's a dress malfunction. And I really, really do think people have lost the ability to see humour in situations now. Everything's taken so damn seriously. And what sort of life is that if you're pained about everything that happens? Yeah. I mean, so much worse things can happen in life. And that is very, very low on the list of things that would affect my daily life.
And actually, it's no different from having your flies down, isn't it? I mean, every other man in the street often has their flies down. It's just it gets picked up. It's on...
She's looking.
Today. I have to say, though, it has made me a little bit more conscious. I do sit down now in the makeup chair in every dress that I wear, just in case there's not something pointing in the wrong direction.
Yeah, you don't want to confirm your droopy boobs, do you? To anyone?
No, I don't. That was the worst thing. I was like, okay, yeah, I did breastfeed both my kids, but I'll have you know, I'm 36 and I'm much boogier than that.
Well, we've put it out there. Everybody knows now.
I love it. Do you know what I love about you, Toni, is you're so real, and I think you're going to be so encouraging for our listeners. You know, you've got a family, you're working hard, you're being really honest. You know, you have your faux pas moments like all of us do, and I just love the fact that you are so truthful about your sickness, overcoming how hard that was, about being real, about facing adversity and crisis as well. And the message to the listeners is that, you know, again, nobody's life is perfect, is it?
No, nobody's life's perfect. You've got to find the fun in life, haven't you? And it's our job to find the fun in life. You know, like, you know, you can be crying with your best friend one minute, can't you, and snorting, laughing the next, and that's what you need to do, isn't it? And, you know, we're all about self-love and all of that, but that whole bit of self-deprecating is actually quite funny as well, isn't it? You know, making fun of yourself, knowing where you're a bit goofy and
being able to laugh in those dark moments as well. I mean, I think we've all had dark moments that just seem really bleak and black, and then a friend comes in, or, you know, a family member comes in, and you just have a laugh in that moment, and you just feel different, don't you? It just takes the weight of that pressure off you at that moment.
You think of when you're most happy in life, and for me it's when I'm not taking things too seriously. And look, sometimes I've got a job where I have to do serious interviews, but in between times, life is there, it's short, and bad things happen on a daily basis, and you literally don't know when that might be you. And so I think, what's the point in wasting time being earnest? Because I just think it's not the best way to be living, and I certainly don't want to be that way. And you talk about me being real. Well, quite honestly, I don't know any other way to be. I'm an oversharer, like I think both you ladies perhaps are too. But I just don't see the point in hiding it, because it is what it is, and I'm not ashamed of it. And I felt the same way when I went through surrogacy with Lockie. I remember having quite a serious discussion with my mother about it, and she said to me, you know, if you talk about surrogacy publicly, well, I just don't want Lockie to be labelled as the surrogacy baby. And I said, Mum, no matter what happens, I know I love this child. It's very obvious he's very much longed for. I'm not treating him any differently to my children. And people are going to be like, oh, she's got a baby and she wasn't pregnant. They're going to ask questions. So I'd rather just be open and honest from the beginning, and actually help people along the way. And it's not a weird like thing that we've just done on the side. It's actually becoming far more common, and there's not a lot of information about it. So we chose to be public about it, and I think it was the best thing we ever did.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you were really, really public about your autoimmune disease as well, because you were obviously on TV at that time as well, weren't you? And you were pumped with steroids, and you just played it all out in front of the public. So
yeah, well, that, to be honest, part of that was for selfish reasons, because I looked like I was about 7 months pregnant, to be honest, and I had people asking me, are you pregnant again? And for selfish reasons, I wanted to tell them, I'm actually not. I'm actually really sick, and I look like I'm bloated and on the steroids because I am, and this is why, and my hair's falling out, and that's why I look a bit different. And part of it was to, you know, for my own sanity, so people understood. And if I was looking a bit puffy on a particular night, well, they would know there was a reason for it. Yeah. It wasn't that I'd just eaten too many pies, although I have in the past looked like that because of that reason.
Have all of we.
Love it. No, and it's so refreshing to be honest, isn't it? Because, and this is a big message for our teenagers, because they don't have their identity yet, they don't have that resilience, but learning about who you are, learning about your values and what's important. Like you say, you don't know any other way than to be open and honest. And Sue and I are exactly the same, heart on our sleeve. What you see is what you get. And if you don't like me, that's fine, but I'm not going to change for you, because that's not my job. My job is not to make you happy. My job is to make me happy.
And I think there's a certain amount of happiness that comes with being yourself and authentic and free. And I see that with my kids now, and I see their different little personalities, and it would mortify me if they felt they needed to change that to conform, or if they had to change that because that's not the way it's done. I just think there's only one way to have authenticity in your life, and that is to be true to who you want to be. And if people don't like you, so be it. It took me a long time to realize that not everyone's going to even like it when you're happy and positive. They'll see that as a negative, like, for goodness sakes, but who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
We've been talking about recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, you've got those friends that want to be with you through the dark times, but then when you're happy, they can't be there because they like to lift you up. So we now choose to have these friends that want to be with us through everything, and then you have this beautiful tribe, and then you really don't give a crap what anybody else thinks about you, because you know that when you're authentic with people who love you, when you're in your good moments and your bad moments, you realise exactly how beautiful you are. It's just another confirmation, isn't it?
I know, and you just want to, I wish you could tell that to your younger self, because I remember being a teenager and I was quite a people pleaser, and there's really no need to be, because I think people gravitate towards people that are real, and it just takes you a while sometimes to realise that, and totally. I think that's the message we should be telling our teens. Yeah,
and this is exactly why we both work with teens, because our main aim is to reduce the suicide rate in New Zealand, and because we absolutely freaking love teenagers. They're amazing. And they've got so much to offer. I just want them to know that, and hence that's the message we're getting out there.
So on that note, I think we'll close on that lovely authentic note.
Yeah.
Be real, be authentic. And we are just so grateful, Toni, to have you on board today, to hear your wonderful stories, to laugh with you, to share some of your life story, and just to hear you encourage so many people, I know, as you do. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I've really enjoyed it, and I love that message. I genuinely feel like people need to lighten the load on themselves, and any way you can do that is going to help your mental health, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you so much, Toni, for joining us today.
Pleasure, ladies.
Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Pool. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.